Hi there, everyone. How do you feel about boosting a soggy middle? And I'm not talking about the one that rests around my waist. I'm talking about the one in your book. If you're keen on finding out how to get past that soggy middle stage of your book writing process, then keep listening. Hi there. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lisa Oliver. I am a self-published author in the paranormal romance genre, and I have been supporting myself with my writing for the past 8 years. Look for me on Google. There's heaps about me there. Okay, what do you do about that saggy middle? Or soggy middle? Do you say soggy or do you say saggy? Either way, it's that droopy bit that comes in between your really exciting beginning, when you're really thrilled about introducing your characters, your world, and your plot, and then the really climatic ending where you've got big things going off, everything's exploding, blah, 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 huge, big, your climax at the end of the scene, at the end of the book. But then there's this stretch in the middle that can be anything from 3 to 30 chapters long, depending on how long your book is, that kind of sags. It doesn't really do anything because its only purpose is to get the reader from here, happy, excited beginning, and here, climatic ending. But the middle bit is actually really important. This is where the readers learn more about the characters. This is where they start to really root for them or wish they were dead and all that sort of thing. It's where you're supposed to provide, it's where you filter in all your little backstories and things like that. The middle of the book is vitally important. It is also it is the hardest section of a book to write because we've gotten past the initial excitement. We haven't reached the climatic ending yet. So this is where the drudgery begins, the hard slog, page by page, chapter by chapter, until we get to the climax at the end. So how do you get past that? Before you start worrying that maybe there's something wrong with your story, can I stop you? Because chances are there isn't. If you have a well thought out beginning, middle, and end, then you're fine. But you can still suffer from the soggy middle syndrome, okay? Because as a writer, we get impacted by our book, by our characters, by a million other things. And when we're excited at the beginning of our story, it shows. It reflects in the words we use, the speed at which we type, and everything else like that. And likewise at the end of our book. You know when it's coming and you're really pounding out the things. This is, particularly the climatic scenes of the book. This is where you're sitting up until 2:00 in the morning, still typing, probably keeping everybody else in the house awake if you type as hard as I do. And you just keep going because you've got to keep going because the scene's just there and it's awesome. It's also a relief because you've got past the soggy middle syndrome. Okay, but first of all, if you're a new writer, please understand, soggy middles happen to everybody, okay? It doesn't matter how long you've been writing. It doesn't matter how many books you've got out. There comes a point in your story where it goes meh. Now, sometimes that's an important thing. If you've had a really energetic and fast-paced beginning to your story, which is yes, yay, because remember when we start a book, we always want to jump straight into a scene. Well, if they kept jumping into different scenes and it was all very busy and energetic, then sometimes a lull in the story is not a bad thing. This is where characters reconnect. This is where characters reassess. This is where characters see how they've moved or how their plot has moved or them as characters have moved towards their eventual climax. So I'm not talking about the lull in a story which is actually vitally important, because otherwise your poor readers will be exhausted by the time they're finished. You've got to realise when they're reading your book and their characters are all busy, they're doing all their stuff, a reader's heart rate can increase. A reader can get really engrossed, and they're feeling it. They're right there in the page. They're doing it too. You've got to give them a break at some point, otherwise the poor sods won't make it to the end of the book. But that's different, those lulls in the story that allows everybody to go, reassess, rework out what's going on, plot a bit more, move forward. They are different to the soggy middle. The soggy middle is where even when you're writing the words, the excitement's not there. So how do you do it? How do you inject the same amount of enthusiasm for the middle of your book as you do for the endings or the beginnings? There are a couple of things. I mean, basically what it comes down to is continuing to be excited about the story that you're writing and being passionate about the fact that you're writing. But it doesn't matter how passionate or exciting you are, there are still going to be those days when you think, oh boy, tap, 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 tap. It's not happening. If you feel like that and it's just one day, leave it. Type 100 words, because remember, I'm trying to encourage you all to do the 100 words a day thing. Do 100 words and leave it. Just come back to it the next day. Maybe you'll think of something overnight. Maybe something will come to you in a dream. Maybe something will come to you when you're watching telly or YouTube or whatever it is you do. And you'll suddenly think, oh, I could put that in my story. And that might boost it up in the middle a bit. Now, the other thing I wanted to suggest was you could include a short subplot, but you have to be really careful if you do that. There are times, and if you look at reviews of books for sale, you quite often see where a reader will think, or a number of readers will think, because everybody's entitled to their opinion, but you kind of need more than one to get a consensus, that something is artificially contrived in the middle of a book just to move the plot along, to make the pages move faster, or to keep the readers interested. But the thing is adding a subplot that you've seeded the ideas for at the beginning of your story isn't a bad idea. That would actually work, provided that subplot is also tied up before you get to the end of your book. Alternatively, you could introduce a long arc, because of course you're writing a series, aren't you? Because, series books sell better than standalones. So it's possible that you could introduce another long arc element that is not going to be resolved at the end of this book, but will have to be remembered by the author when they come to write the next one. You have no idea the number of times I have to keep rereading my old books to remind me what I've got to include in the new one. But anyway, that's one tip to suggest that. You could also introduce or inject something different for one of your characters, or maybe both. I mean, maybe they're both, maybe you've got a pair of characters. Well, I always have a pair of characters, or at least two. And then they've done all this, they've solved that, they've worked out the small problem, and they're not quite ready to go to the next problem yet. And maybe they suddenly decide, one of them turns around and says, oh, hey, how do you feel like salsa dancing? Or fancy, going to a boxing match tonight, or whatever else. You can introduce something else unusual that your character may or may not want to do, or your characters. But again, be really careful that it's not contrived. It's got to seem natural. It's got to be a natural extension. If you've got a guy who spends his life in a library and he suddenly says, oh, do you fancy going to the latest boxing match that's in town this week? That might seem a little contrived, unless the guy pulls out a whole stack of facts and figures and things about the people who are boxing to prove he actually does have an interest. But yeah, you've got to be careful about introducing exciting elements into the middle of your story. But the fact remains is your beautifully crafted, amazingly exciting climax is going to mean nothing if your readers don't get to it. So you need to keep enough pace in the middle of your story and enough interest to keep your readers moving through the pages. And that does bring me to another point, which is pacing your story. If you have got far too much action at the beginning of your book, and then there's this lull, and then there's the climax, there's no room there for your characters to develop or grow. There's nowhere there for your readers to be able to stop and absorb the plot and the complexity behind your plot. So I think, isn't it? I believe that in typically creative writing courses, they suggest you write a book like a W, I think it is, where you've got your action at the beginning and it goes down to a lull, then it moves back up to a shorter action point and then back down to a lull and then back up to the climax, and the climatic scene is where the book ends. Think of it like that. Think of things that you can incorporate. If you plot your novel, think of things that you can incorporate in the middle that are not contrived, are not just there to fill a page, but are actually in crucial parts of the plot, but that can help push you along until you get to your climatic scene. And if you're a pantser, like I am, go back and rethink about who your characters are, and maybe introduce something new about one or both of your characters that can help move the plot along in the middle until you get to your wonderfully big climatic scene. Well, there you go, my friends. I do hope that helps. As always, if you have any questions, please pop it below. By the way, I just scanned my notes and I missed a point. You could always be writing 2 books at a time. Then you've got to keep both of them exciting, but just make sure you're not in the middle of both of them. Anyway, I'm winding up. I digress. If you did enjoy this content, and if you thought it was remotely helpful, or maybe you just thought I was funny, then please hit like and subscribe. If you've got any questions about writing your book, it doesn't matter what genre you are in or anything else, I want to help. Okay, if you're keen on self-publishing and making a living as a writer and self-publishing, then this is what I do, and this is what I've been doing for 8 years. So, pick my brain and so that you can do it too. And yep, I've done the like and subscribe thing. So all that's left to say is please hug the ones you love, my friends, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.